And it's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Lew Ferguson. Lew is a member of the U.S. Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the PCAOB, since January 2011 when he was appointed to this position by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. In April of 2013, he was elected chairman of the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators, otherwise known as IFIAR, following a one-year term as vice chairman. IFIAR is an organization of more than 40 national audit oversight bodies that operate independently of the accounting profession. Join me in welcoming Mr. Lew Ferguson.
Thank you, James. I have to start off as well today with the disclaimer saying that what I say are my remarks and are not necessarily the remarks of any organization with which I am affiliated. And I want to talk to you briefly today about how we look at audit quality at the PCAOB and in IFIAR. And we came at audit quality from the perspective of a regulator, and particularly at the PCAOB, a regulator who inspects 250 audit firms each year and looks at more than 1,500 audit files every single year. And one of the things we noticed over the years as we looked at this was there was a high level of repeated findings, repeated failures. And even though under United States law there is a requirement when there is an inspection that yields an adverse finding, that finding be remediated within a 12-month period, we were finding that frequently the remediations were not satisfactory and the findings were repeated year after year. So that led us to ask the question, well, what's the problem here? Why is this happening? As we began to look at what is a good quality audit, people would say to us, well, you know, we know a good quality audit when we see it, but it's not clear we can define it. We know it requires professional skepticism, a skeptical state of mind, and it requires a high level of care. But beyond that, it was very hard to find out what really was involved in a quality audit. So we began a project and began to think about, this is also rather hard to read, but we began to look at this, and as we thought about audit quality, we came up with 4 separate areas that we thought we needed to look at. First of all, the first thing we did was we began to require the firms about 3 years ago to do what we call root cause analysis. That is basically that they were to go back and come back to us and say, we want you to look at the behavioral, the cultural, the structural, the institutional aspects of your firms that you think may be causing these factors, these defects to be repeated. Don't just come back to us and say, well, we'll do more training. We'll do more, because that's clearly not working. We want you to dig very deeply into what the underlying causes of these problems are. Secondly, we thought that perhaps we need to look at our own quality control standards. In terms of auditing standards, do we need to begin to look at changing the quality, the governing structure, the quality control standards, the supervision standards? We also thought, is it possible we could come up with quite specific, measurable metrics of audit quality that people could look at that would have predictive value? And fourth, as we began to have some interaction with audit committees, and in the early years of our organization, we had very little interaction with audit committees. We interacted with investors a lot, but we didn't interact with audit committees, who are in fact, in many ways, the primary interactors with the auditors. But as we began to look at audit committees in the United States, while we found that there were some extraordinarily high-quality audit committees, particularly on the largest companies in the United States, once you got below that level, there were a lot of audit committees that were not particularly skillful in dealing with their auditors. And so we thought we need to do some more outreach here. We need to begin to interact with audit committees and teach them how we look at the audit process, to help them do a better job of that. And then finally, on the audit quality indicator project, as I said, we came up with the idea that we should do a study, and we will be putting out a thought piece within the next 3 or 4 months that will be available on our website, and I would hope you would look at, that basically will set forth our beginning thoughts about audit quality indicators. Now, again, this is very difficult to read. But we basically, in looking at this, we came up with essentially three different examples of promising audit quality indicators. And they were divided into 3 categories: inputs, processes, and the results we would expect from high-quality audit indicators. On inputs, we will ask questions about things like staff leverage ratios, partner workload. How is the partner's workload? Does the partner have too many clients? Staff utilization. How is the staff being utilized? What are the hours? Are people being worked to death? Industry expertise. Do you have the right experts on a particular client? And outsourcing to service centers. This is something that the larger accounting firms are doing increasingly now, outsourcing matters to service centers around the world. And the question is, what's the impact of that on audit quality? A number of firms are now beginning actually to do mathematical calculations of things like these, and to some extent beginning to find some correlations with what appear to be high-quality audits. Now, correlation does not lead to causation necessarily, and we have to be very careful about that. But it seems to us that you can begin to think about these things in terms of metrics that may be related to audit quality. In terms of processes, one of the things we look at is the tone at the top in the firm. What messages are the management of the firm sending? Is it sending that audit quality is the highest good of the firm, the primary value of the firm, or are other things, including profitability, development of business, are those valued more? One of the things we look at in looking at this, particularly in the United States, the larger firms conduct surveys every year of all of their employees about the tone at the top of the firm. They do that for their own governance purposes, but it's also very useful as a regulator to be able to see this and see what the firms are thinking about. The audit firm's own internal quality control reviews, the inspections that they do of their own work. We compare that with the PCAOB's results of our inspections of the 1,500 files we look at each year to see what are the correlations. Are the firms finding the same things we are or not? And if there's a disconnect, why is there a disconnect? Finally, we look at factors like the compensation of senior audit firm members in terms of what are they being rewarded for? Are they being rewarded for audit quality? Or are they being rewarded for business getting or other things? In terms of the outputs or the results of this, we would expect, if we can begin to identify audit quality indicators that really are meaningful and really work, that you should expect to see fewer restatements as a result of errors. You should expect to see more timely reporting of internal control weaknesses. You should expect to see a reasonable warning of going concern problems. And one of the issues that prompted us to think about this issue to start with were complaints in the United States after the financial crisis of 2008 of where were the auditors? How was it possible that every major financial institution in the United States got a clean financial opinion only a few months before they had to be bailed out to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars by the United States Treasury? How is that possible? Finally, we would look at things like, were material frauds? Is there a higher level of the discovery and the reporting of material frauds? And finally, what are the trends in both our own PCAOB enforcement actions and in US SEC enforcement actions? But we would expect to see favorable trends in all of these things if indeed we have correctly identified audit quality indicators and the firms have begun to actively make changes in response to what is being identified. Now it's interesting because IFER is also following along with a similar program. IFER conducts and has conducted now, it's in the process of conducting its third annual survey of inspection results. And this involves some 30 countries around the world that have put their regulatory inspection results together, and another 14 countries that have looked at the 28 largest financial institutions in the world and the inspection results for those firms and for those entities. And we've come up with our own findings, and through the Global Public Policy Committee of IFER, we meet with the leadership of the largest 6 networks, accounting networks, twice a year, and we require them basically also to correlate their own internal international findings with the IFER findings, and Steve Maslin will probably tell you something about this, and to do their own root cause analysis of what has lain behind these findings. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here today talking about the IFER inspection results, which are included in my slides, but I would urge you to look at them because it's a very interesting set of information that shows you the kinds of things that are being found by regulators around the world. And there's a uniformity. The same kinds of problems that are found in the United States are found basically everywhere else in the world. But sticking with audit quality indicators for a minute, if we go on and look at who the possible users of audit quality indicators, there really are 4. There are customers, there's the unit of account, there would be possibly collection and dissemination of the indicators, and the phasing and scoping of the project. And one of the questions that comes to us, that occurs to us and we'd like answers to is, for example, should engagement teams, to the extent we identify audit quality indicators, should engagement teams discuss those with the audit committees? Should they come in and basically discuss the performance of their audit and the metrics that we have identified with the audit engagement team? Over time, you would expect an audit committee would begin to become familiar with these and would then be able to at least ask more intelligent questions of the auditor. Should the public receive these AQIs? Should these be put out either in some form of report or at least in a think piece that we raise with the public? What's the proper unit of account? Or maybe it's all 4 of these. Is it the audit industry? Is it the audit firm? Is it the audit on an engagement basis? Or is it by issuer or industry? The question is, who should collect and disseminate audit quality indicators? Should it be the firms themselves? Should it be regulators? Should it be an international body like IFER? Should the collection and measurement of audit quality indicators be voluntary, or should it be mandatory? And when you're providing them, do we need to provide context to explain people that while there may be correlations here, again, it is not necessarily clear that this would be causative. So as you look at this, you can see that there are many, many different factors here that go into this and go into the kinds of ways we are thinking about it. But it's an attempt to give meaning and give context to audit quality. What does it mean beyond simply high-flown statements about, good conduct? And it is an attempt to find something that is actually measurable and can lead to changes in behavior. And so with that, I will turn it over to James again.